competency in both developing WordPress in terms of building out functionality, but in the more immediate future, what's relevant to me is debugging. And in order to debug, which is actually a current project I'm working on for a client, I need to be comfortable going into the WordPress core file structure, which is entirely built using PHP. So working backward, I kind of realized pretty quickly that the foundation of that investigation would have to include a real solid backing in PHP. So this is just kind of how I'm documenting that process of building out that knowledge and using YouTube Live as my rubber ducky to kind of like soundboard all of my thoughts and ideas as I go throughout that process. So if you happen to be listening to this, I would love to hear from you if you have a similar story or if you just want to share your own. But this is very much a self-indulgent project, but figured why not make it public so that if there's any value to be derived from any of this for anyone else out there, you got a friend, you got someone else doing the same thing. So anyway, I'm going to jump right back in. I'm using the lynda.com video series on the PHP Essential Training, and we're picking up right where we left off with array functions. So we were talking about arrays, associative arrays. Now the functions you can do with arrays is where we're picking up.
In this movie, I want us to talk about array functions. And there are a lot of functions for working with arrays because arrays are super useful and we use them in a lot of different contexts. There's lots of things that we might want to do with them, ways we want to manipulate that information. So we're going to look at a few of the most common ones, and then I'm going to show you how you can look up the rest of them. To start with, let's create ourselves a new file for this, and let's make our basic.html file saved as, we'll call this array functions.php. There we go. It's that sandbox, array functions. So to start with, I'm going to paste in a numbers array, which is the same numbers that we were working with in the last two videos. But the difference is that I've jumbled them all around. They're not in the same order anymore. That's because one of the things that we're going to be looking at is how we can sort those numbers. But before we do that, I'm going to look at a couple of other ones. The simplest one, of course, is just that we can count those values. We can use count to tell us how many items are in the array. What's the size? What are the number of items that it contains? There's max, which will tell us the maximum value, and min to tell us the minimum value. That's very handy, especially if we're working with math and we want to make sure that we take something that's always the maximum of several choices or the minimum of several choices.
Counts.
Let's bring those up in a
for
browser.
An array,
take a look. Save
max
that.
for an array, and min for an array.
Firefox, and instead of associative
arrays, what the
arrays,
minimum or maximum value of a string would be.
Array functions.
I imagine arrays will be
6 values in there. The maximum value is 42. The minimum value is 4.
Often
As I said, we can also
WordPress
sort those values. Just make it a little bigger here. So I'm going
everything
to sort them,
in
and
a
then
computer
right after
comes
I
down
sort
to
them, I
data,
use print
and
out.
an array is one of the ways
sort,
to structure larger amounts of data
reverse sort,
logically.
We'll output the result.
So
take a look at what each of those
I
give
imagine
us.
that this would be a
Reload
fairly
this page.
important
So sort, and then reverse sort.
data type
Like
to
you can
know
put
about.
PRE tags around those to make
So
it
sort and our sort,
Let's do that real quick.
they sort differently.
There we go.
Yes.
You can see that sort returned them in ascending order, whereas reverse sort
is
returned them in
chronological,
descending
our sort
order
is
by
reverse
value.
chronological.
Now there are rules if these aren't numbers as to how they get sorted. Obviously, if you were sorting a bunch of strings, it would sort them alphabetically by the first letter, and then the second letter, and so on. If you were sorting an array that had a mixture of things, it would sort them for you, but the sort order might not be what you'd expect, because whether it sorts a letter before a number or a number before a letter is a little bit arbitrary, and you'd have to look that up in PHP to see which one it was going to do. So you typically wouldn't do it in that case, but it would go ahead and handle it for you. Notice one thing about sort, which is that it actually sorted the array in place. We didn't do any kind of assignment. We didn't have to say numbers equals the sorted version of that, right? It changed it in place. It's a destructive function.
Okay,
so
it's
our
a deep
old version,
sort.
our old unsorted version doesn't exist
Destructs
anymore,
the order
right?
of the
Sorted them
original
in place. Another handy
data.
function is how we can turn an array into a string. In other words, combine values together
print
to get
underscore
a string.
R
And
again
we can do that with
is how you
implode.
can
So what we do is we say what
not
array we want
user-facing,
is the
but
second argument. The first argument
if
is
you
what
need
the
to see the
separator
structure.
is between each of those elements. So here I've said it's a space and an asterisk and a space. I'll save that and you'll see what it looks like.
So implode, I bet
Let's
that's
just
a
do
string
an echo on that so we can see it.
with that string in
You'll
the
see
middle.
that it imploded it. Now it's 42
Which is
star,
interesting for
23 star, 16 star.
data
right?
visualization,
Not an array anymore.
presentation of data.
This is a string. We could do get type on that and we would see that it was a string now. The opposite of implode is explode.
So that would be
explode is going to take a string like num string, and every time that it finds this string, it's going to use it as a divider between the values.
and it's
So every time it
print out
sees
an array.
space asterisk space, it's going to say, all right, that's where I need to split this into a new object in the array. So we can see what it does here. Let's go back, return.
Yeah.
You can see that here's the array. It divided it back up into each of the values. I took this string and said, all right, 42 is the first value. This is a separator. 23 is the next value. This is a separator, and so on. This is extremely useful.
So and it looks like on the back end, associative arrays and arrays really do look identical, right? So if you define an array in your code, it actually comes out to appearing as if you have explicitly defined each value within the array with a key corresponding to the index number of that value. So 0 equals less than sign 42. 1 equals sign less than sign 23, et cetera, et cetera.
List, right? So you have first name, comma, last name, comma, address, comma, city, comma, state, comma, zip, that sort of thing. Well, you can break that up into an array by telling it to explode it based on where the commas are.
That's really interesting. So comma separated values can be exploded into an array. And what he was just saying there, you probably heard it, is take an address, explode it on the comma. You might have to parse it to get rid of any spacing, which shouldn't be that difficult. Basically, the commas become the point at which you separate the values, and all of a sudden, your 0th value becomes the street address. Your first, the value at the first index becomes the town. The value of the second index becomes the state. The third becomes the zip code. And that's an interesting way to kind of think about getting data and validating it into a database based on an input form of some kind. If you were to accept, home address on one line rather than dividing it onto city, town, or if you're just taking input from, some input where the parsing hasn't been done for you. So that's interesting. So that's explode and implode.
To tell whether or not something is in an array or not. Does an array contain a value? So 15 in an array, echo, does the array contain the number 15
array
inside number? So it's going to return
true
or false. Is 19 in the array?
So does it return true or false, or 1 or 0?
False, whether 19
I think if it returns
is
true or false, it's a 1 or 0.
So in_array is what allows us to do that. Let's save that. Try that out. So 15 in an array?
And it's
yes,
the 1.
It is. True is represented by 1 here. 19 in an array? No. False. False is represented by having nothing there.
Yeah.
Now, as I said, there are many, many functions for working with arrays. If you go to the php.net website, php.net/manual, and then your language, en/ref.array.php. Here's array functions, and here's a whole long list of them. You can see I could just scroll down the list here. There are a few that I think are especially interesting. There's array keys that returns just another array of only the keys from an associative array.
PHP
and then there's the same thing for array
functions.
values down here. Returns just the values. So if you have a key value pairs, you can just grab all the keys out of it or all the values out of it.
Oh, so you can grab all
array
those.
Push is an interesting one that allows you to push an element onto the end of an array.
Yep.
Array pop does the opposite. It takes an element off the end of the array.
And push and pop.
Array shift is what you would use to put an element onto the front of an array. An array unshift is what you would use to take it off of the beginning of the array. Array unique will make sure that all of the items are unique in the array. It takes out any duplicates. There's array search up here that searches the array for a given value and returns the corresponding key if it finds it. So it's a value search through your array. And then array random. It's also nice. Array rand _rand. This can pick one or more random entries out of an array. So each one of those you can click through, you can look for the documentation on it, you can surf around these. If you're working with an array and you're not sure how to accomplish what you want, this page may provide the answers that you're looking for.
So the TLDR on arrays is really to just know, A, that they're called arrays, B, how to, the syntax in PHP to represent an array, both so that you know how to write one and you know how to recognize one. Especially good to know that after 5.3, PHP does not require you to explicitly use the word array to define an array. And I wonder if that's true for associative arrays as well. I bet, well, I would just not, I would use the array. But then to know that you can look up, first of all, that you can manipulate arrays as arrays, but also as associative arrays, and also as the values within those arrays. So you can get each value within the array using, I would imagine, the indexing technique, the bracketed indexing technique, and a loop, and then process each value as a string, or, I mean, you could do a loop to see if it is a string, do a Boolean for that, and if it is a string, process that string. So you can process the data of each string within an array, and if you know that you can just search for the array functions page on php.net, you can look at all the different functions built into PHP for processing. And also so that if you see any of those functions show up in WordPress, know that this is a built-in function that you can look at. It's kind of like literally learning the language, right? So that the more you see the kinds of functions that are built into PHP and you see what they do and you experience what they do, you know when you see something that's not built in. So then you know that, okay, you need to look at a resource file and see where this function is actually defined because it's not in the standard PHP library. And I would imagine if I just do a search on php.net, for example, is array, I would go right to a page that defines that function. And let's see if I can make sense of this actually. So is array finds whether a variable is an array. Let me paste the link to this page. And then we have the description, is array, and then in parentheses, mixed, $var, bool, finds whether the given variable is an array. What does mixed mean? I'm going to click on mixed. Pseudo types and variables used in this documentation. Mixed indicates that a parameter may accept multiple, but not necessarily all types. Get type, for example, will accept all PHP types, while str_replace will accept strings and arrays. So mixed indicates that a parameter may accept multiple types. All right. Is array will come back with a Boolean. Well, let's see parameters. Parameters are mixed and then $var. Parameters var, the variable being evaluated. Yep, so we're evaluating a given variable passed into isArray as marked by the parentheses, and to get a Boolean result, return values. Returns true if var is an array, false otherwise. And then examples. Example number 1. Check that variable is an array. $yes equals array. And then in parentheses, this, comma, is, comma, an array. And all of those are in single quotes. Echo is array, yes. Question mark, array, colon, not an array, semicolon. That's a ternary expression to consolidate an if-else logical operation into a single line of code, which I saw first, I think, in maybe JavaScript, but maybe also Python. I think it's one of the older forms of coding that's been around forever, and it shows up everywhere. And at first I thought, like, Well, this is kind of cryptic because if you don't know coding, then there's no way you'll understand a ternary expression when you see it. Except that, I guess the first thing you ask is a question. So a question mark is a valid punctuation mark. And then, if you kind of think of it like as a literal expression, like you're being expressive, like question about something, if it's true, boom. And then the colon is like, if you need to keep going because you're not yet satisfied with that answer, this. So if you think of it as like, ba, ba, it's like, ba, 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 ba. It's like question, yes, no. Then it kind of makes sense. So I'll probably end up using that a lot more in my own coding. And then the variable no is this is a string, which technically is not the best answer because it could, if it's not an array, it doesn't mean it's a string. It could also be a float or an int or something like that. Okay, I think I understand how to use these description pages in the PHP documentation. Let's look at one more. Let's look at str, which is kind of a complicated one. Str, find the first occurrence of a string. Str, okay, so it accepts a string, which is the variable haystack, a mixed variable needle, and then open bracket, comma, Boolean before needle equals false, and then the output is a string. So it says returns part of haystack string starting from and including the first occurrence of the needle to the end of the haystack. And remembering this, if I'm looking for, this is the story of a girl, if that's the string, and I do string of, it will return of a girl because it will search the string until it finds, and it does have to be a string, so that's why it's called string, like haystack variable of type string, right? So that's how it works in documentation. Parse through the string until you find the string, and parse through, I guess, the haystack until you find the needle. So the first thing you pass in is the string, and the second thing you pass in is the needle. Yep. And then include that part of the string and the rest of it. So don't, I guess it would stop processing and just echo the rest of that to the, I don't even know what you call it, but to the command line, for lack of a better word. So to the parser, to the HTML markup. Okay. I think that's enough belaboring that concept. So let's keep going here.
In this movie, we're going to look at Boolean.
Boolean
is a programming type that can either be true or false. That's it. One of those two values. And true is not the string true or even the number
Boolean
one.
It's
just simply the value true. Booleans are
True
very useful in programming because we can use them when performing tests. For example, in the last movie, we used the inArray function to test whether an integer was inside of an array. The result was that the test was a Boolean. True if the integer was present, false if it was not. Let's start by creating ourselves a new workspace for this. I'll open up basic.html. We'll do save as. We're going to call this Booleans. Notice how that's spelled Booleans. And I'll also call it Booleans here. And let's create our PHP tags. Now, a Boolean is simply the value true or the value false. Notice that there are no quotes around that. It's not a string. So we could have, for example, result 1 equals true. And down here we'll have
Boolean
result 2 equals false. Now all we're doing is assigning a Boolean to a variable.
A data
assign
type.
it just like we do anything else.
And
we can take a look at what these values look like.
All lowercase, true or
save
false.
That, result 1 and result 2 being echoed. So we'll just go to our browser, and instead of array functions,
in something like Atom, that'll
now
be
load up
color-coded properly.
Notice that result 1
So,
comes
yeah.
back and says 1. Result 2 doesn't
I
have
wonder
any.
if
We've
that's-
seen this before.
I wonder if the browser
1
gets to
is
decide
what happens
how
when
to-
PHP converts
how
a
to
Boolean
reflect.
true into a string. It turns it into
Yeah.
1. When it's converting a Boolean false into a string, it has nothing. It outputs absolutely nothing. Not a 0, but actually no string at all. Now we can assure ourselves that result 2 is in fact a Boolean by calling another function here called is_bool. That will tell us whether or not
Okay.
something is a Boolean.
So you
Just
got
like we had
is_bool
is
as a
numeric
function
earlier, is
to
float. Well, we had
test
is
whether or
bool,
not
whether
something
is a Boolean.
is Boolean.
What is it going to return to us? A Boolean.
A Boolean.
But the difference is that
Is_bool
if
returns
result
bool.
2 is a Boolean, it's going to return true,
True.
which we'll be able to see. That'll come
Is_bool
back as
false
being
is
1.
true.
Now notice
There's some
that I
logic
have
for you.
true and false all lowercase here. In PHP, you'll often see it written all uppercase, true and false.
Oh, so you can
or
do
you'll see
all
it
uppercase.
And you
all-
can waste a lot of time arguing with people about the right way to do it in PHP. Everyone has their belief about whether they should be uppercase or lowercase. But in truth, in PHP, they're case insensitive, and you can use whichever one you
Okay.
prefer. They're absolutely equal. I prefer to use the lowercase version. Now, where Booleans are going to be most useful
Because in
to
like
us
PHP,
is
you
when we're
need
working
to
with
capitalize the
conditions,
Boolean
which we
value
haven't seen
in
yet.
order
But the basic
to
idea
have
is in our code, we want to
Python
say, well,
understand it
if
correctly.
one thing is
So-
true, then do this bit of code. If something else is true, then do this other bit of code. I'm going to give you a little sneak peek of conditionals, even though we're not quite ready to really dive into them yet. I'll go ahead and give you a preview. Let's say that we have number equal to 3.14, and we're going to write an if statement. Don't worry too much about the format of the if statement. We'll be covering this later, but I'm going to check to see whether number is a float, right? We saw that is float earlier, and it returns a Boolean as a result. So if it returns true, then echo it is a float. There we go. Let's just try that out. There it is. You see that it is a float. And if we change it so that it's not a float, make it a 3, we reload the page, you'll see that it doesn't execute that code. So that's where Booleans become really useful, is when we're working with conditionals. And we're going to do a lot of that when we're programming.
Oh yeah,
So we'll see more of
conditionals are
that when we
huge.
come to the conditional section. For now, just make sure that you
Yeah.
understand.
This is going to be
the
great.
basics of
I
what
feel
a Boolean
really good
is,
about learning a
that
new
Boolean
language
is
right now.
not a
Like,
string or an integer. It
I've
is
learned
its
so
own
many
type.
new
It's
languages,
always either
and I
true
didn't feel
or
good
false.
about it. But this time, actually, like I feel good about it.
In this movie, we're going to be talking
So,
about null.
that's awesome.
Null is a fancy term for nothing, for not having a
Ah,
value.
null
It's
and
not
empty,
Zero.
yeah.
It's not an empty string. It's the
All good
actual
stuff.
lack
All
of
good
value.
stuff.
And if we can set a value into a variable, we also have to have some way to talk about the fact that variable might not have a value at all. And null allows us to do that. Let's take a look at it by first creating a page where we can work with null. And I'm going to do that by opening up basic.html and then choosing save as. We're going to save this as null.php. So null. Now, like true and false, the Booleans that we just talked about, null can either be written in lowercase or in all uppercase. And you will waste a lot
Okay,
of time arguing with
so you
people
can-
about the right way to do
you
it.
can
in
write
PHP,
null,
whether one is
lowercase
better than
or
the other, or one
uppercase.
has better performance than the other.
I'm just going to
The
go
truth
lowercase
is,
because
they're
that's
case
easier.
insensitive, and
They're
that you
just
can
case
use absolutely
insensitive. That's
whichever
good to
one
know.
you prefer.
The
There is no
variables are
difference.
not case
I'm going to use the
insensitive.
lowercase version. Let's set
Right?
a variable equal to var1 equal to null.
I gotta
And
check
just for
that.
contrast, let's set var2
Literally just
equal
gonna
to
do
an
that.
empty string.
Our
so that we can see the difference between
PHP
those two.
variables case.
Now, like a lot of the other types that we've looked at, there are
Insensitive.
functions that allow us to test whether it is of a certain type. So we
Variable
can
names
test
are
whether
case
this
sensitive, but
is
function names
null
are
or not.
not case
Is
sensitive. That's
underscore null will
interesting.
tell us if the
If
variable
you
is
define
null.
function
We'll
names
do
in
that to both of
lowercase
these.
but
Let's
colon
also do it
uppercase
to the
work.
third one as well.
Huh.
This is var3. We'll test var3. Now, var3 isn't
Interesting.
set, right? It hasn't been set to anything. We'll see what that gives us back. So go to Firefox, and instead of Booleans, we'll load up null.php. So it came back and said, is variable 1 null? Yes, it is. Variable 2, is that null? No, it's not. That was my empty string, so that's not considered null. var3, is it null? I get a notice here. That's not an error. That's not a warning. It's a notice just saying, hey, little heads up here. You're in the middle of developing, and I notice that you're making a reference to an undefined variable. So I want to call your attention to it here. Notices are different than warnings in PHP. But it goes ahead after that notice and gives us the result, which is that yes, in fact, var3 is null. The fact that it hasn't been set means that it has no value. So the answer is true. It is null. So notice the difference between that. Notice what happened with var1 and what happened with var3. By setting it specifically to null, I avoid this notice that pops up. And we can contrast that with what happens if we have is set. Right? So let me just paste in a few others here. var1 is set.
So
var2
is set,
var3
ISSET.
Is set doesn't have a space here, no underscore between is set.
That's weird.
Together.
That's weird.
And let's just reload the page now. And you can see that it tells us that variable 1 is not set, variable 3 is not set, and variable 2 is set. Now, not set means that it's null, right? So being null, we're being told it's the same thing as being unset. We know it's not exactly the same thing. We saw that with is null. It's close. For the purposes of most of our tests, it will be the same. So that's what null is. Null is just the lack of having a value. That's a pretty easy concept. But this is also a good spot for us to talk about a function in PHP called empty. And as you would expect, empty returns a Boolean, true or false, for whether a variable is considered to be empty. What you might not expect, though, are the things that it considers to be empty. In PHP, empty is going to be an empty string, null, 0, 0.0, meaning a float in which the value is 0, a string with the 0 inside of it, false, or an empty array. All of those things are considered empty. So we can provide our
empty seems like a pretty versatile function.
Whether these things are considered empty.
No string, a null, a 0, 0.0.
So it has a value. var3.
So yeah, that's just a good Boolean check for
var3 is going to be
if something is at a 0 value.
0
in any kind of
inside the string
traditional
like that.
sense.
Let's go back over to our browser and let's try those out. Let's see what things are empty. Is var1 empty? Yes. var2 empty? Yes. var3 is empty also. So null, an empty string, and this is a very important one, 0 inside the string are all considered to be empty. Now this broad catch-all approach can be extremely useful, but you have to use it with a lot of caution. For example, imagine that you had a web form that was submitting a value to your PHP code. And imagine that that field was, how many children do you have? You want to check if that field is left blank by the user. And if not, you want to say, hey, you need to fill out this. I need to know how many children you have. Empty would detect an empty string or no value being submitted, which is what you want. But it would also not allow the number of children you have to be 0 as a value, which is probably not what you intended, right? They would not be able to submit the value 0. Just like we saw here, that would be considered empty as well. So most times you'll need to use further conditions with empty, such as, is it empty and also not numeric? Or is it empty but not null? Now I'm mentioning this now because empty is a leading cause of bugs in PHP code. So something that you're really going to want to keep an eye out for. During the previous movies, we've been looking at different types in PHPs. So strings, integers, floats, those are all called types. And we've seen a few times when PHP converted a value from one type to another type for us. For example, we were able to add a string to an integer. And we saw that PHP converted a Boolean true to be the string 1 when it was output to our web page. This process is referred to as type juggling when PHP does it on the fly for us. We can also explicitly set a type ourselves. For example, converting a string 1 into the integer 1. And when we do it, it's called typecasting.
I think this might be a good place to stop.
In 2 ways.
Take
we can do it using a function.
Break.
We have the set type function for that purpose.
Oh no, I'll wait
till
we're done
type,
with
and then in parentheses
data
2
types.
arguments. The item
okay, so
that's
set type will take
another type.
A variable.
And the second argument is the type that we want to set it to. So in this case, it's going to
interesting.
Convert
So set
var
type
to be an integer or make sure that
the
is
variable,
an integer.
and then
notice the integer
as
is
a
in quotes. It's a
string
that we're passing in. The other way that we can set type
you're gonna actually write
the name
what
of
you
the
want it to
desired
be.
type
So
in
integer
before the item being cast.
or
so for example,
okay,
parentheses integer,
in parentheses integer,
parentheses
and then the
space,
variable.
and then the item that we want to cast.
Both an option.
Notice that there's not quotes around integer in this case. We're just putting integer right there between the parentheses. It's not a string. It is just an instruction to PHP. And this is the syntax of how it's done in the C programming language. That's where this comes from. The types that we can use, the values that we can provide for typecasting are the different types that we've seen so far. We've got string, integer, or int for short, float, array,
data types,
Boolean,
string, int,
for short.
float, array.
Now for some of these, it's going to be kind of obvious. If we're converting an integer to a float or an integer to a string, it's pretty obvious the kind of conversion that it's going to make. But it's probably less obvious to you if you're going to convert the number 42 into a Boolean or convert an array to a string, what that kind of result is going to give you.
True.
You can try them in an experiment to see so you get a feel for what they do, or the PHP.net website actually has a list of the rules that explains how it converts from one type to the other. So you can look those up. Let's create a page where we can do some experiments and play with both type juggling and type casting. So let's start by opening up basic.html. We'll do save as. I'm going to call this page type_casting.php, even though it's technically going to be for both type juggling and type casting.
Type casting, type juggling.
Type casting is probably the more common term that people use to refer to it, mostly because it's the thing that we have control over. So let's start out by just putting type juggling in the HTML.
Yeah,
here.
type juggling is when
and then
PHP tells you
we'll define count is going to be equal
or
to
rather,
a string.
If you try to add
2,
an int and a string, it tries to juggle
and we can find out
string
what type it is
by
we can
casting it
is string,
as int.
is int, those kinds of queries that we learned when we were learning those types. An even better way to do it is to go get type. So we're going to just ask it to get back the type of count for us. Put a BR tag at the end. So that's going to report back. Now we know what the type of that is. It's pretty obvious. The type is a string. Even though it's a number, it's going to be a string. So now let's do a little bit of PHP. Let's add count plus equals 3. So that's before we were looking at integers. So let's do get type again. Then let's just
does it?
It's
going to go from string to int.
Type_casting.
It's going to go from string to int.
So type
wow, that's
starts
cool.
out being a string,
so if you have a string that's 3 and then you add 3 to it in PHP,
count
it turns in
when we added plus 3 to it.
To an int.
Type was converted. It knew, even though you started with a string, if I'm going to add these two things together, I'm going to need to have integers. So it does the conversion for you. That's type juggling. PHP tries to make it work out for you. And we saw that if we had 2 cats, for example, with the same thing, reload the page, it still works just fine. It still goes ahead and adds them together. We could output the count and you would see that it was equal to 5. I can also see type juggling going back the other way. Let's convert our integer back to a string by concatenating it with 2 other strings. Here I have cats equal to a string, followed by what is now an integer. Remember, we ended up with an integer here, and then another string.
Right, so then if you try to concatenate
we'll see what that returns to us.
int into a string,
and it's back to being a string again.
I wonder what
and
happens
that's because it said, hey, I'm going to concatenate a string, an integer, and a string. Well, if I'm doing concatenation, I need to turn those all into a string. And so it juggles it back to a string for us. Now, I think that this second one, using an integer to a string, is not such a bad thing to do. And I think you'll see that happen a lot in people's PHP code.
It's a lot
because
worse.
The conversion from an integer to a string is super simple, right? And it's something that we're probably going to be doing a lot. However, I think in other cases, like here, when we're converting a string into an integer, or especially if we're doing more complex conversions, maybe you're trying to convert an array into an integer, right? That seems like a much more extreme example. It's sloppy programming to rely on PHP to do the switching for you. It's much better for you to make the change yourself. So I wouldn't say that you can never do type juggling, because I think you'll find me doing this kind of thing in my code all the time. But you won't find me doing this kind of thing in my code. I think that's the kind of thing in my mind that would be considered sloppy programming. So how do we make the change ourselves? Let's give ourselves a BR tag here, and then let's do type casting BR. So we talked about the 2 ways that we can do type casting. One is to use a function. We have the set type function. We're going to go ahead and use that same variable count, but this time it ended up with a string here. Now we're going to change it back into an integer. Do get type on that and see what that is. Let's just bring that up and try it real quick. There you go. Cast it back to an integer. It was a string. Here we changed it back to an integer. The other way that we can do it is by using that declaration in front of it, right? String in parentheses. This is not a string itself. It's just the word string inside parentheses right before count. And I'm setting count 2 equal to that value. And then we can compare. We can
so you got set type and get type
2 equals.
For data
types.
types.
Bring this up.
So those are built in. So when I see those,
now notice count 1
in WP Core, which will be the next thing we look at, then I'll know that is built in PHP.
About the difference between doing it these 2 different ways.
A default option in PHP that's like normal programming language stuff.
Affects the
not
variable
WordPress
right
stuff.
where it is and changes its type. It recasts it in place. This one does not do that. And we can actually, if we take this away, you would see the difference, and you would see that it doesn't recast it. Let's make that point a little more explicit. Let's just make a BR tag here, and I'll do PHP $test1 is equal to the number 3, And then we'll do that same thing, but we'll make test2. So we'll have two of them. They're absolutely identical. And then let's set the type both ways. So let's try the first one. We're going to use set type and the test1, and its type is going to be string.
Yep.
Explicitly convert.
And the next one, you're just going to do
next one,
PHP.
Let's just do it by putting string and then test2.
And then if we
see what I'm doing? I'm setting the type both ways here.
For both.
Now, let's test the type for both of them. Just grab one of these lines up here. Use that as a starting point. So we're going to call it test1 and test1. We'll echo back that value. And then do the same thing for test2. Okay, so let's bring that up and let's take a look. Reload the page. And you see the first one was changed to a string. The second one was not changed. It still is an integer. This change did not last.
Oh.
It only takes place as it's being used. In this case up here,
interesting,
as it's being assigned. Conversion is happening during the assignment. It's not making a permanent change to the item itself. So it's important for us while we're programming to be
So if you want to change something,
happens.
So it's immutable. So they don't talk about it in this video, but an important concept in programming is mutability versus immutability. Mutability is when something like a data type is changeable or changed. And immutable or immutability is when something cannot be changed or is not changed. They used the word destructive earlier, or non-destructive would be what would that be? The verb form of what is an immutable change. So when you use the parentheses data type format syntax, that is an immutable, non-destructive thing. I don't know how to say it, but if you are using the set type function, that is a destructive change to the variable, changing the data type of the variable permanently, not just inline. Kind of like the same thing you use style. The style for inline CSS, right? You're not changing the CSS style sheet. You're just changing that particular instance of a style. It's different. All right, we're going to take a quick break right here. So thanks for joining me, and I'll see you in the next one, which will be real soon.